I know, I have a tweet all ready to go. I actually planned this.
What? I only posted the link 2 hours ago anyway, so I don't know if it's going to make any difference.
I know, like, I was thinking about this because, like, we said at the beginning, it's like some of them might just be us hanging out and talking about the book, and I'm like, I did not promote this in time, so that might be what happens. I know Julia's going to try and make it back in time.
Yeah. And Eowyn did say she was coming. I did tell her the date a week ago.
Good.
If not the time. So.
I know, like, I had apparently put it in my calendar, like we had already decided the time. So I thought we had, and then all of a sudden I'm like, wait a second, I think I made that up. I don't think we actually confirmed that. So if you are watching this back because you were planning to be here live and we did not announce it in time, I'm sorry.
Hello, happy birthday.
Yay. Oh, it's your birthday today? Happy birthday. Thank you for celebrating with us.
All right. Do we know if Julia's coming? If not, we may as well start.
The last I heard is that she was going to try and get back in time. I don't know specifics. Yeah, so I think we can go ahead and start.
Yeah, that's
whenever you want.
Let's go ahead. All right. Hi everyone. Welcome to our second last Francis Hardinge live show for Deeplight. Cara, do you want to? Oh, your cover's different.
I know, yeah. It's like very slightly. It's like very similar background, but.
Do you want to introduce yourself? We've done this many times, so I don't think we need to do it in detail.
We'll do the short version. Hi everyone, I'm Kara. My channel is obviously Wild Book Garden. That's where we are right now, and I already have our links in the description, including my new Instagram link, which I'm in this weird in between space where it's like I don't really know. It's probably going to be very sporadic. Don't follow me for my Instagram content, but if that's something you're into, it is now there for you. It's going to be a lot of cats and books and probably makeup. And other than that, I don't really know. So come along for the ride if you're curious.
Sporadic is fine. I think mine's also very sporadic, even though it's theoretically in my main plan.
It happens. Yeah, so that's me.
I'm Hannah. You'd think that after this many times of doing it, I'd have figured out like how to introduce myself, and I still haven't. But I am now Bullgowns and Books on mainly Instagram and blog, and that's the main things. So okay, before we start, we wanted to mention, I'll say this again at the end, that the next one for the live show for Deeplight probably next month, which will be our last one. We'll also be doing a bit of a like retrospective wrap up about the whole project. So if anyone has anything they want to say, I don't know, favorite quotes or reflections or anything, feel free to send those to us so we can discuss them, include them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add about that, Cara.
I think that's the main thing. I am also going to try and remember, because I'll be like leading the Unraveler one next month. I'm going to try and remember that when we switch to the retrospective part to like announce that. So in case people want to hear that, but I guess we might be spoiling stuff. So I'll try and figure out how we can do that. But yeah, it's going to be really fun. I can't believe it's our last one next month. I don't want to think about that.
All right. And yeah, so the last thing before we go into the discussion is content warnings. So the ones the main ones that might come up in the discussion for this one are drowning, violence and murder, toxic friendship and gaslighting, and ableism around deafness. All right, so Cara, general thoughts, star rating, any big picture feelings?
Yeah, this was a very interesting reading experience. Like, I feel bad because I know this is like Eowyn's favorite. This was not my favorite. There were parts of it that reminded me of Verdigris Deep, but I liked that one a lot more. And it's still like a very well written book. I can see why it's one that a lot of people really love. Like, Frances Hardinge doesn't get recommended a ton, but the people that I've heard talk about her have generally been talking about Deeplight. Like, I know a lot of people really enjoyed that one, or this one. And I think part of what I found frustrating is stuff where it's like, this wasn't poorly written. It's just like, well, I'm sure we'll get into this when we talk about characters, but it was just, there were parts of it that like were not making me want to pick up the book. So even though it was well written, it wasn't my favorite reading experience. Like, it was very interesting to read another book by her that I had no idea what was going to happen. Because most of the ones we've done up to this point have been rereads. Like, the last one that I hadn't read was, I always mix up the titles, the sequel that we did for our second one. I can't remember which that was. But yeah, also the plot was like somehow really different from what I thought it was going to be. Like, I didn't realize I had expectations about the plot until it did not happen. So I'm all over the place. I feel like I'm not going to have very cohesive thoughts for this one.
When do we ever have cohesive thoughts? It's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I probably liked it more than you did in that case. It's still, yeah, it's not my favorite, but I did like it. And I don't know if this is exactly what you mean, but I think I felt this one the most viscerally in some ways. Like, I really felt stomach turning during some of the scenes. So yeah, it wasn't like a fun reading experience, but I still thought that it was, very well written.
Yeah.
Yeah, and scary. I found this one much more creepy than a lot of the others.
Interesting. Yeah, there were definitely, I guess we can kind of get into spoilers. There's like a character in particular that I was like, I hate that you're in this book. Please stop it. So yeah, like, I don't think of this as being like one of the creepier ones for me, but like that one character is like the exception for me.
So let's quickly do thoughts on the setting before we go into characters. I don't know if you have particular thoughts. I felt like it was less of a character than some of her other settings in this one. But also, I was really thrown off by the fact that there's a map. I don't know if this is just me overreading it, but I think this is the only one that has a map. I haven't seen a hard copy of Unraveler, so I can't be certain, but I think it's the only one.
I didn't refer to the map once. Like, I knew it was there, and I was like, oh, okay, cool design thing. But like, I'm not a fan of maps in fantasy anyway, so I just usually don't use them, and I resent feeling like I have to use them, which I know is stupid. In this case, I didn't feel like I had to use it. It just like wasn't a factor for me. I was like, oh, that's a nice design thing that I won't be using. Yeah, like, I liked the setting. I feel like, as always, it's very well thought out. Like, it genuinely feels like she could give you a whole history book about these islands. And she's just not telling you all of it. She's just telling you what you need to know. But I do feel like it was less like vibrant maybe than some of her settings are. The only thing that one of the things that I do think was really like effective with the setting was the way they all feel about the ocean, and especially as that relates to Selfin. I like the way that Hark responds to like fear of the ocean. I thought that was really interesting, and like that to me was a cool part of the setting. But I also I would have liked to hear more about how the Myriad interacts with the continent, like about Cly and everything. I thought that was really interesting. And I know that this is set like in the islands, like we're not necessarily going to hear a ton of backstory about other places, but I don't know. I like those little tantalizing bits that we got, and I would have liked more of that. yeah, I feel like the map was cosmetic. Like it was cool, but you really didn't need to know any of it.
Yeah, I wonder how much of it is a publisher thing, because there's also the illustrations of the gods in the back, which feels very un-Francis Hardinge.
Yeah, like those like were interesting to look at, but I don't know. I pictured most of them as just like vaguely amorphous blobs, and then like if they told us something specific about them, I was like, okay, vaguely
This one
amorphous
has legs,
blobs.
yeah.
Yeah, with a lobster claw or something. Like the only one that I actually like put effort into picturing was the Hidden Lady. And then like a couple of the ones where they made a big point of like what they look like, I like kind of pictured them, like the Swallower. But yeah, again, it was cosmetic.
Yeah, even saying thoughts. They are. I'm not saying they're not of value and they're not nice to look at. It's like it just felt odd that they were there.
It was like a very cool feature, but yeah, she's not like, I don't think any of her other books have had that kind of illustration.
Yeah, and yeah, like even the map. Like I don't feel like her worlds need maps, even though they are complicated. I don't know. But yeah, I feel like this is far too much time to have spent on this map. So let's move on to the characters. Let's start with Hark, obviously. And I feel like a lot of my feelings about Hark are wrapped up in Jelt and the way they relate to each other. So if you want to bring in feelings on Jelt as well, go ahead.
Yeah. I really liked Hark. I really felt for him. Like I feel like even though it was frustrating watching him take so long to realize what was going on, I think that was realistic. And I liked, like he is pretty different at the beginning of the book versus like halfway through or at the end. So I really liked seeing him like realize or like become, like start to care about people more. Like there's that great line about like somehow along the way, like other people's injuries had become his problem, which I love. So I liked his character arc, and I did like, he's kind of like a typical Francis Hardinge protagonist that I love, where he's just like a regular person who's doing his best, and he ends up having to save the world because like nobody else will. So I liked him for that. And I don't know if you want me to talk about Jilt now, or
only if you feel
okay.
it. If you want to, we can come back to it in a minute.
Yeah, we'll come back to him. Yeah, their friendship dynamic, like I said, reminded me a lot of the one in Verdigris Deep, but I have thoughts about that too that I'll save for when we talk about Jilt.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. I have one of my discussion points was comparisons with Vertigris Deep because I also really felt that quite strongly.
Yeah.
But yeah, with Hark, I just, yeah, like you were saying, I love how his confidence grows in himself by the end, and like that his strength is what Jelt always said it was, but when he's in control of it himself, it's so much more powerful. And yeah, and I loved like everything about the storytelling. Like even his name suggests that he's listening and collecting, stories and secrets. So yeah, as usual with these sorts of main characters. Yeah, I love that line from, I think it was Selfin. He's like, why are you so determined to save all of these terrible people? And he's just like, yeah, I'm going to save the world, and I'm also going to save every individual person.
Yeah. I think that's one of the constants in her main characters, is that like they keep trying to save people. And even when it stops it from being annoying for me because it is so genuine, and Hark even recognizes that he probably won't be able to, but he has that memory of who Jelt is. So yeah, I love the way that he keeps trying. He keeps trying to save people even though they don't deserve it.
Yeah, and so on that note, let's talk about Jelt.
Let's go. I couldn't stand him. I freaking hated that man. Boy, man. He's like 4 years older than Hark. I don't remember how old he is. Yeah, like I'm like incoherent about him for the opposite reason, because I just wanted him to get crushed by a rock the whole book. Like the only time I felt positively towards Jelt was at the very, 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 very beginning. And And I don't know why this one is like so visceral for me, because she has, like, Frances Hardinge has written other friendships that go bad or that start bad. Like, I'm thinking of like Zuel from A Face Like Glass. You know, she's pretty nasty at the beginning. Not as nasty as Jelt, we find out, but it's like there's other she's done other characters that like offend me less, but there is something about the specific ways that Jelt manipulates Hark, and he gets him into these situations where he could die and then like judges him for it. And like Jelt just, I don't know, he pushed all my buttons. I hated him. And like we were talking about for Vertigrade Deep, I feel like with Josh and Ryan, even though Josh very similarly is like, you know, kind of corrupted by power and he's willing to hurt people for it, and with it, I feel like with Josh you get enough backstory for him that you can kind of like, it doesn't excuse what he did, but even the little glimpses we get of like his home life. And we also see more examples of Josh being, or like we hear like memories of Josh like helping Ryan and Chell. So it feels like when they say like, I know he's being horrible, but he is still our friend, that means more. Whereas in Deeplight, like we do hear from Hark that he used to be different, but we never really see any of that specifically. So all of our experience with Jeld is just him being the absolute worst. Like, I hate him. He might be my least favorite Frances Hardinge character. I don't know. I really, really hated him. Anyone says Jelt was awful and their friendship is very hard to read for anyone who has ever had a similar relationship, but it breaks my heart that Jelt sees it that he had no choice but to make these terrible decisions, leaving Hark to run away from him. Yeah, I think with Jelt, like the sadness I feel is more about like what a waste it was. Like he could have been a good person. He could have been a decent friend. It's like most of my like sympathy I think is for everybody else, but I think that's important to be able to feel the sympathy for these terrible people. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I think part of it is the gaslighting as well, because it's the way he manipulates. It's not just that he's mean, but it's the way that he manipulates Hark into doubting himself so much, even though Hark is right most of the time, and Hark is so desperate to like make a life for himself. And he, you know, when he gets to Sanctuary and he's finally like, he feels like his life is, you know, worth something, and he feels like he's doing something important, and then Jelt just comes and drags him back into it. And to that the scene early on where Jelt first comes and finds him on the island, that was when like I felt it in my stomach. I was like, no, this.
Yeah, because like Hark finally has a chance to like find something kind of good, you know. I mean, he's still an indentured servant, but he's found like kind of a better place. He has hope. He has like plans for how things can get better. And that was the part too for me where like Jelt showed up, and when he started like trying to get him back into it, that I was like, oh no. Because I wasn't, up until then, I wasn't actually sure what kind of character Jelt was, you know, because like all we really knew about him is that he and Hark were best friends. They were always there for each other, but we hadn't seen him for most of the book. But that was the point that I really like, I was like, oh, okay, this is where we're going with this. Everyone says it's deflection, which is the typical tactic of emotional abuse. Yeah. And this is one of the parts I was talking about at the beginning, where it's like, it's really well written, like the toxic relationship between Jelt and Hark, but it was so unpleasant to read. Like, because Jelt is in the book so much. Like even when he's not there, like he's there, and he's physically there for a lot of it too. And I just like never wanted to pick this book up because I just hated Jelt so much. Which is not like bad writing. Arguably that's good writing, but I still was like you said, Hannah, it's like I didn't have like fun reading this. Yeah.
Like I think it's a really well done book, but I don't see myself revisiting it in the way that I do think, like I have read, and I'm sure I will read other Frances Hardinge books multiple times.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think arguably the third main character, Selfin, and also specifically thoughts on her as like a secondary POV character, because we only hear from her a few times, but still she's the only one we hear from other than Hark. So
Right.
I don't know, thoughts on why that is or the effect of that.
I really loved her. I wish we had gotten more of her in the book, because she was maybe my favorite character. Like, I did really like Hark, so maybe they're tied. But I really wanted more from Selfin, and I was actually thinking that she was going to be a more like prominent part of the story than she was. Like, because I remember, Hannah, when we were talking about, which one was it? I think it was the Lie Tree, and you were saying how one of the reasons it's not your favorite is because one of your favorite parts of Frances Hardinge's books is when they kind of get the gang together. And I feel like Deeplight is another one where that doesn't really happen until like right at the end. And so I kept expecting Selfin to kind of become an ally. And I don't know. I really wish she had been in the book more, because her parts were some of my favorite. Also, added bonus of when she was on the page, usually Jelt wasn't there. But I really liked her. I kind of wonder if maybe the reason she wasn't a primary main character is because she is deaf and Frances Hardinge is not. And even though I found out that the backstory for this book, and I don't know if you were going to talk about this, Hannah, so stop me if I'm like jumping ahead. But like a reader of hers wrote to her who is deaf and asked like if she was ever going to write a character who was. And so Frances Hardinge like dedicated this book to her and like worked with her and like other like specialists and experts on like writing a like hearing impaired or deaf character and like on sign language and all of that. So she clearly put a lot of effort into it. But I wonder if maybe that's why she didn't want to make her like a protagonist, like a primary main character, because she didn't want to, like she just didn't feel like she could do that. That would be my only guess about like if she had a reason for not doing it. But
yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but that is a good point. The deafness thing was going to be my next thing after Selfin. But yeah, no, you're right, because when I first put down that like thing about being a secondary POV character fairly early on, when we'd had I think 2 scenes from her, and then we basically didn't hear from her again until nearly the end. But I still, I don't know, thought that it was interesting that we did hear from her, because she's such a different perspective as well. I guess similar to Hart, because they both don't trust the Heart, but like she really knows who she is, in a way that Hart doesn't, and I think they're kind of an interesting parallels between them. But yeah, like you were saying, I really loved her as well, and the way she again, a bit like Hark, really loves her family and loves the islands and wants to save them, but she just struggles to make them understand that that's what she wants. I thought the bit about when she's talking about how her mother doesn't understand her anymore, those are really sad.
Yeah. And one thing that always gets to me too, is when somebody loves someone enough or a group of people enough that like I will do something that will make you hate me forever if it means that it keeps you safe. Like that just always like gets to me. It's like the fact that she knows that the people who are most important to her in the world will hate her, and she's like this is like the only home she has, the only family and friends she has, and she is willing to give them up for their own good. Like that just like gets me in my heart.
Ewan saying when she tells Hark he's not allowed to pick his friends anymore.
Oh my god, yeah. I love that. Like at one point, this is I think even before that, like Hark says something like, but he's my friend, and then he's like, wait, I'm not really good at that. Yeah.
Yeah. She's so much stronger than Hark, and in knowing herself, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like Hark by the end of the book and like Selfin throughout the book are just like they're so brave in like very understated ways. Like, and we see that like people like Jelt are never gonna understand that what they're doing is brave, because it's not what he thinks, as being like, I don't know, worthwhile. So
yeah, so let's neither of us are particularly qualified to speak about the deaf representation, so I don't know if we want to spend too much time on it, but if you have anything else to say, you've already mentioned the story that Frances Hardinge gives in the acknowledgements about this reader who wrote to her. So, any thoughts?
Yeah, as you said, I'm not qualified to speak on how well it was done. I can just say from a reader's perspective, it felt very thoughtful. It felt very intentional and well researched, and it seems like Frances Hardinge really did like put in a lot of like working with people who knew, and I feel like this book is kind of a good example of how you can incorporate other experiences without like centering your voice as like being, the one that is qualified to tell these stories. Like we were talking about Selwyn being a very important character in the story, but Frances Hardinge is not like, claiming that representation for herself. So again, like I'm not own voices for that. It just felt like it was done very thoughtfully.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. And it felt like you're saying, how she put thought into it, like the details about how the sign language is slightly different on the different islands, because that's totally how it would go. This sign language or spoken languages, that is how language works. So it's clear that she's put thought and effort into it.
And even the part where like it made me so mad. Selwyn is remembering that one, I can't remember that character's name, but like the one who basically started taking over her friend group, and just like the ways that she would like make her feel stupid that like nobody else maybe would notice who like wasn't using sign language. Like I just like details like that. It's like I think like obviously the people that she was working with put in a lot of this work as well, but yeah, it just seems like she really thought through exactly how it would affect characters, affect like a setting. I also really liked that in this society, being sea kissed is something to be honored and respected. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, Eowyn's saying as well, it was impeccably done to make the sea kiss so celebrated. It felt natural. Yes, but I thought it was really interesting how, like, yes, they're so celebrated, like Rig's so proud to have Seeker's daughter, and yet Selwyn is struggling so much to connect to Rig. That conflict was really well done as well. But yeah, okay. I think we've sort of started spoiling things slightly, but let's officially go into spoilers. If you haven't read the book and you're watching this back, this is your warning. So, okay, let's start with Quest. Thoughts about Quest?
Yeah, he was interesting. I don't know if I really like have collected all my thoughts on him. We obviously finding out that he started, the cataclysm. I like didn't know it, but it wasn't like surprising to me. I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. I think also he brings up like his character brings up a lot of like interesting conversations about like how much suffering can you justify by saying you're going to make things better in the long run. I thought that was interesting. Yeah, and I liked that Hark had somebody on his side, like he had one person who was kind of an ally. Yeah, I guess I don't have a lot of thoughts on him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought he was interesting because this book doesn't have one of those Frances Hardinge like betrayal characters. And arguably Quest is the closest thing to that. Like he doesn't betray Hark, he's still good as much as we can call him good, but he is the one keeping the big secret.
Yeah. I feel like Vine kind of
a
little like that, but it's even her, it's like Hark knew from the beginning that she could turn on him in a second. I was a little maybe I'm skipping here. I was a little like, I don't know, surprised when we went from Vine is like ready to like murder Hark because of what he saw, and then it's like, all right, we're all in the sub together, like which I guess they didn't have a lot of choices, but
yeah. I'm saying he killed the gods. He did so much good, but at such a cost. Yeah. And yeah, so I think it's interesting with the cataclysm as well, kind of jumping off that we don't know what it is until quite late in the book, which, like, I guess the main function of that is because it would spoil Quest's story completely, but also a secondary effect is that, like, it just gives a feeling of, you know, actually I don't know what's happening in this world.
Yeah.
And, you know, when Hark has this thing about the quote, I think it's one of my quotes, but about having joined the story partway through, like the reader feels like that as well, because we also have no idea what happened in this world, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, and I thought it was interesting, like, finding out that the gods were fed by fear. Was really like that. I guess, you know, that was also kind of a twist, although that also didn't surprise me. Like, it made sense with the story, and I thought it was interesting how even after realizing that, Quest kind of calls Hark on the fact that, like, he's still sort of romanticizing this idea, which, like, I thought was super, like, especially interesting because, like, as a reader, I was kind of doing the same thing. Like, all the stories about the lady are just so interesting that there was, like, I liked her more than the others, you know, even though knowing they were, like, killing people and everything. So I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah, I would say it's the big mystery of the book: how do you kill a god? So I think, you know, I don't know if I'd made the connection that the cataclysm killed all the gods. Like, yes, it's kind of obvious, but I feel like I hadn't explicitly made that connection in my head until Quest tells his story. Like, you know that all the gods are gone and there was this big event, but I don't know, it didn't feel. It feels kind of nebulous until you've heard the actual events. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I agree. I also, like, I think we didn't, one of the things that happened because we didn't know details about the cataclysm is, like, I didn't really have a conception of how many people died in it. And so when they're talking about what Quest did and if it was justified, I think that didn't hit me as hard because, like, I wasn't picturing, like, this catastrophic event that killed a ton of people. Like, not saying that it didn't matter, but, like, I wasn't thinking of it on the same level. And so from my perspective, I was kind of like, well, it seems pretty clear that Quest did save more people than he lost. Like, I'm not saying that, you know, we should all be fine with what he did, but yeah, I think that was one thing that I felt, I guess, suffered a little bit for the vagueness. Is I was like, I don't know that this is feeling like as much of a moral quandary as it's supposed to.
Yeah. Okay, so the only other two characters I had down were Dr. Vine and Brig. So generally, thoughts on either of them if you want to discuss.
Yeah, I was not a big fan of Vine. I kind of mentioned I thought, like, this often happens where they, like, team up with characters who are not the best, but I guess I usually find it more convincing because here I'm like, you were literally about to murder Hark for just, like, seeing what you were doing, and then we find out, like, oh no, she wasn't gonna use the god, like, she was just gonna, like, harvest it. She's really on your side, mostly, maybe, kind of. And I don't know, like, I think I just, like, I wanted to like her more than I did. Yeah, like, I think I just wasn't as attached to her as I would have liked to be, as, like, I often am with Frances Hardinge's characters. Like, we even see when she's being friendly to Hark that there's always that, like, danger of her turning on him, and so I just like couldn't make myself like her consistently. Yeah, that's kind of how I felt.
Yeah, I don't know, because I felt the same, but I kind of was a bit attached to her at the beginning, or I wanted to be attached to her, or I wanted to trust her, even though intellectually you know not to. And, like, when Jelt comes along, you want Hark to tell her about it, even though you don't trust her, but you still
Yeah, exactly. I was rooting for you.
Yeah. And yeah, I think it's interesting, just because we can doesn't mean we should. Questions around that, and which is, quite current about, we can make a god, but like she, I don't know, thought she was going to be using it for academic, and research it, but it's all sort of got a bit bigger than she realized, and maybe she was naive not to realize that that's where it would end up.
Yeah, that was something that kind of surprised me, is not only that like she wasn't actually as evil as we thought she was going to be, but also, yeah, that she wouldn't kind of see some of this coming. Like, I mean, not that she would know that the Leaguers, like, I kept forgetting who the Leaguers were, honestly, like what they wanted.
Well, I'm not sure it's actually really ever. I'm not sure we ever get told what they do. You
Yeah,
sort of have to piece it together.
It's like, I know that they were like the most pro Time of the Gods, and that I think their big thing was like they thought that the Myriad should have a navy because like everybody else was gonna attack them because they didn't have gods protecting them anymore, which I think like makes sense. Like Hark even acknowledges, he's like, yeah, like they're not really normal, but like that might be true. But yeah, like, so I'm not saying that like I think Vine should have had like realized their whole plan before it happened, but I do think it was very weird that like she is so like secretive and sketchy, and it's like, you're telling me that like they fooled you by like I don't know, just like turning on you.
Yeah.
She
was basically naive. Yeah, and like at the end when Hark and Selfin are talking to the governor, and he's like, yeah, she was a genius, but also her inventions like useless.
Yeah, like that was one of the lines I really liked too. He said something like brilliant execution of a terrible idea or something. And I'm like, yeah. Yeah, that whole like screaming submarine thing he talks about, he's like, this is gonna be great. He's like, then they're all gonna build fake screaming submarines and we'll never have to fight anyone again.
Yeah, okay. Any thoughts on Rig?
Oh, yeah, sorry. There you
go. Yeah, I'm saying using the prejudice of the continent to justify bringing back monsters. Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk about the colonialism in a bit. We'll talk about the colonialism, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So any thoughts on Rig, or not particularly? I don't.
Not
or
really,
the gang generally.
Yeah. I cared about them because Selfin did, and I loved Selfin. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much what it came down to. And I really liked this. I guess this is more about Selfin, but I really liked all the part about when she's talking about being afraid of the water, and how she's like, I'm the only sane one, and they're trying to fix me. Like I really felt that. Like I thought that was a really good way to say it. So yeah, I was pretty frustrated with Rig. I cared about her because Selfin did, but she obviously is not interested in, well, I don't know if I want to say she's not interested in understanding her daughter. She's like willfully not trying to see things from her point of view. And it's like, you kind of mentioned this earlier, Hannah, but it's like she is honored to have a sea-kissed daughter, but she kind of makes no attempt to actually meet her on those terms, you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like Rick wasn't in the book that much, but I wasn't like super attached to her, except for what she meant to Selfin. Like wanted Selfin to be happy.
Yeah, like she felt like one of those people who like just can't conceive of anyone feeling differently than she does. Mm-hmm. She's like, Selfin's scared of the sea, and I just, she just doesn't understand. Like she cannot conceptualize what that means. Which is a type of person that exists.
Yes. It's like, I don't have this experience, therefore experience is invalid. Like,
yeah. Okay. Let's go into themes then. I feel like there were a lot of thorny ones. So we're back to religion again, 3 in a row. Religion. There's no religion in Unraveler, more or less. I'm quite glad about that.
Yeah, her track record is kind of interesting with that one. Yeah, did you have like a specific question?
Not particularly, just thoughts on how religion is handled here and in comparison to the other recent books, if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah. I feel like it's kind of the premise, like based on what the premise of this book is, it's kind of like one note, but it also is like in a very specifically like fantasy world context. So like I don't know. We do get a little bit of information about what other like countries or like islands believe, which I thought that was really interesting. I kind of would have liked to hear more about that, especially like given what happens throughout this book. I just thought it was weird that like that didn't come up. Like I liked the part where Cly like argues with Hark because he's like, you myriad people think that like you're the only ones who matter, the only ones who can, like, I thought that was really interesting, but that was just kind of like a one and done sort of thing. So yeah, I don't know. Like we've talked about this before. It's like, I feel like she's not usually as nuanced with this theme as she is with her others, which actually, like, for A Skinful of Shadows, which we just read, I think that one was more. And even, like, I think of, like, Gullstruck Island, too. So, like, she obviously can do that. So I wonder if she also just, like, finds it interesting to do that as, like, an antagonistic thing. Like if she finds it, like, a compelling, like, obstacle or, like, I guess antagonist for her characters. So, yeah, I don't know. Like, I didn't love the way it was handled just because it kind of does what it does in the Lie Tree, where it's like, you just don't understand, and that's why. Like, which is a little like that's something that frustrates me more as I get older. It didn't used to bug me as much because it's like, if I wanted to hear that, I could talk to a lot of people I know personally, you know. So, yeah, I don't know. I just like mixed feelings. Clearly, is how I feel about it.
Yeah, Eamon saying as well, using faith to explain what people can't understand. It feels a lot like Fly By Night as well, like this whole idea of like, the gods are not what you thought they were, and the people who believe in them and worship them are just being deceived. Again, yeah, I agree with you that it's not as nuanced as I might wish it was. Although I did think that the concept of Frecht was interesting because there is some kind of divine something in the world, but it's sort of, I don't know.
Yeah.
It was interesting that she made such a point of it because Hart kept coming back to it. I don't know if I have like a point about it, but I just thought it was, it just struck me.
And it's interesting because like this is sort of like what you were saying with the feminism in the Lie Tree, where it's like, I don't disagree with you, but like the way you're going about it, because like the things that she's talking about, it's like religious abuse is a thing, and like I think that is a really important thing to talk about, and I actually would really like to see her tackle that in one of her books in a way that like understands that that is not the totality of it, you know, like, because I think she would be really good at writing that. It just, I guess it kind of, it's like she chooses one path or the other in her books where she talks about religion, and it's like sometimes it's like the more, you know, like nuanced, and which I'm also not trying to like erase anybody's experience who has had a very negative experience with religion. That's not what I'm trying to do. I feel like she either kind of handles it one way or the other, you know, like it's either like only used for control and lies and misleading people, and people just don't know any better, and we have to make them understand that they don't know they don't know any better, or she handles it in a way that's like, this is a very complicated thing and people have a lot of different experiences with it, and like, you know, I don't know. I don't have a point either. I guess I'm just like trying to figure it out.
So religiously, you could read a lot into this, especially in terms of Christianity, as at some point in the Bible it does talk about monsters or devils born of humanity's fear. That's really interesting. I don't know anything about that. So,
yeah, actually, when you said that, it made me think of like in the Bible. A lot of times when angels appear, their first thing they say is "Be not afraid." And the way that they are, if you've seen those like biblically accurate angel memes, I don't know if you guys have seen those, but like they're absolutely wild. Like the way that at some points in the Bible, the way that angels are actually described is like 100 eyes and 100 wings and just this like whirling vortex of eyes. So like in that sense, yeah, that is interesting because like that would probably look like a monster. Yeah, that's an interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that. Interesting connection to make.
Yeah, I think she's putting a lot more into it than it first appears. Yeah, it's possible. And if I went back to it and reread it, I might see more nuance than I did this. And to be fair, I was reading this one in I think we both were reading this one in some of a rush.
Time crunch, unexpectedly, yeah.
Also, I definitely underestimated how long this was. The font is so small. I don't know if the font's really small in yours too.
It doesn't look that small in mine. I don't know if it's like similar if you can see that.
I don't know. Mine was like, I don't know, it felt noticeably smaller than other books I've read recently.
I think your copy looks shorter than mine. So that would make sense that it's like more cramped to
But yeah, anyway. So yeah, okay, so let's talk about identity, which I think was essentially the other big one. Kind of mainly harks thing of who am I really, and what things about me define who I am.
Yeah. Is it Quest who asks him is like, what would be the thing that you defend about yourself and that you would rather die than lose? Which I think is a really interesting, like, yeah, that's a good way to sum it up. Yeah, I really liked the way that was handled here. I like that we kind of are seeing Hark figure that out throughout the book, and he doesn't always realize what his lines are until Jelt tries to force him to cross them, and then he's like, actually no. Like it's like this is something that I have strong feelings about. And I really like how in awe he is of Selfin, like knowing herself so well. And like it's such a good image. Like Princess Hardinge's such a good writer. Like I love the image of like she is fighting tooth and nail not to be forced into accepting the ocean again, to the point where she throws herself into the ocean to escape from the people who are trying to make her get back in the ocean. Like I think that is such a like powerful like moment. Like I think that's like, and I loved seeing Hark like witness that too. He's like, this makes no sense, but I'm like really impressed. Like I think that's another point when he uses the word frecked, which I think is also really interesting. Yeah, I really like the way that identity was used. Obviously, we see with Jelt, like what happens to him is a very like literal expression of that. Like, well, we kind of find out that he's been a monster all along, you know, that he's been killing people the whole time, basically. And now that's sort of reflected in, I guess, like outwardly. Very Victorian. It's like, if you look like a monster, it's because you are one. And then I also really liked how, well, I didn't like it, but like it was a very like sad moment. This is kind of the moment where I did feel some pity for Jelt when Hark realizes that he drowned that day. I did not see that coming. I was like, oh. So I was like mourning like with Hark for who Jelt like used to be, you know, like he could have been this person and he wasn't. So anyway, yeah, identity. Big. Good.
Yeah. And like Hark's, I agree with everything you've said. I thought that Hark, when Hark's worrying that the stone has changed him, that was really interesting. And he was saying like, how would I know? Would I know? which I thought was, because sometimes we don't see it in ourselves when we've changed. But and like you're saying, Quest's whole thing about defining who you are. Everyone's agreeing that the font is tiny. Good. I'm glad that I wasn't just imagining it.
How many pages is your copy?
440-ish.
Oh, okay, that's like about mine then. I think the reason I didn't feel like it was as tiny is because it was super widely spaced in mine, because this is like a really tall paperback. So it probably is pretty small, and I just didn't notice it. It did feel like a long book, though. That was like one of the other, like I actually, it feels wrong to say this, but this is the only one I think I've read from her that I'm like, I was actually kind of bored at some parts in this book, like, because I couldn't really see where the plot was going sometimes. And like, again, Jelt was in it so much. I don't know if you felt like that, Hannah. Like, it just felt like there was a lot of like, it just felt slow to me. Like, it took a while for Hark to even get to the sanctuary, and then it took a while for them to find the heart. And I guess maybe this is partly the synopsis's fault, because the back of mine kind of makes it sound like that's like at the beginning of the book, and it's not until, I don't know, like 100+ pages in. I don't know. I can't even articulate what it was about this one that like didn't hook me as much, because normally I really like water adjacent fantasy. Anyway, that was not on topic to your question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, I don't know if I felt that. Again, like I felt like I was reading it under pressure, so I didn't think I gave myself time to notice if it was slow or.
Doesn't matter if it's slow. I gotta read it fast.
But yeah, I agree about the plot as well. Like, I had no idea where the plot was going or kind of what we were building up to, I guess, which I suppose ties in slightly to colonialism, which is only a slight theme. I think I would have liked it if there was a bit more of it. But yeah, I don't know, because I thought the conversation with Cly, where Cly says, you all, you think that all continents are the same, but we have countries too. And then when Dr. Vine says, I've seen their maps, we are nothing. And then I think those were the two moments that stood out to me. I don't know if you have thoughts on those or anything else.
Not really. Like, I also feel like it wasn't, it's like, I don't know if it even was like a theme, it was kind of like a moment, like we talked about it a little bit, but I mean, comparing it again to Gullstruck Island, which is like one of the central themes is colonialism. So, and I know this book wasn't trying to do that, but yeah, I don't really have any specific thoughts about it, because I don't feel like that was a focus. This is a very like insular book in a way, because it's all about the Myriad, and even like just a few islands in the Myriad for the most part. And I also, this might be partly too because I wasn't always clear on some of the history. Like, we were kind of talking about this earlier. So like, I wasn't always clear like who had lived where and who was there now. So yeah.
I thought, I don't know, I would almost compare it a little bit to A Skinful of Shadows, where it's like, or the threat of invasion is a massive motivating factor for a lot of the characters, but Hark doesn't care about it or realize it, so we don't see as much of it. Kind of almost like how Makepeace, like how religious conflict is a massive thing in The Skinful of Shadows, but Makepeace is not interested in it at all.
Not really interested in any of the big conflicts. Yeah.
But yeah, and we've talked about friendship quite a bit.
Yeah. I take like a deep breath every time Jelt is mentioned. I'm like,
yeah. And we've also talked about So the next thing was comparing it with other books. So we've done a bit of that. I don't know if you have anything else to say about. We both mentioned Vertigo Deep in particular. Comparisons between Giles and Josh, because Josh also is physically changed by
it's
the witch.
very similar, and even like the water thing, like it's a well spirit who is also kind of a god in Verdigris Deep, and here it's like water-based gods. Like I think like there's some elements that are really similar. But like I was saying, I think like in terms of like a toxic friendship, I think Deeplight did that really, really well. But in terms of like caring about that character, I think Verdigris Deep did it a lot better. Like I still was not a fan of Josh. Like I'm sure if you go back and watch our live show, we're not on Team Josh. But I think he was more empathetic, like way more empathetic than Jelt was. I also though like I feel like Verdigris Deep was creepier for me personally, apart from like some of the specific things with Jelt. So I don't know. I guess like Verdigris Deep, I think executed some of the things better, which is funny because like it's mostly a contemporary with like one fantasy element, and this is like a whole fantasy book. But I feel like Verdigris Deep did some of those things in a way that I found more effective. Not that you have to like pick which one did it better if you're comparing them. That's just something that I kept thinking about while I was reading this one. Yeah. I don't know. I guess that's my main comparison.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would say I don't know what it was about this one that I found creepier. I like the scene where Jelt says that he's going to rearrange Hawk's face. I don't know, something about that. That was terrifying. But yeah, I agree that I think I cared more about Josh. But I think I don't know. I think I also loved Ryan and Shell slightly more than I loved Hark, which might have been part of it. Even seeing A Face Like Glass where Caverna was beautiful reminds me of Frecht.
I thought of that too. That's one of my favorite lines or like sections of the book is when the kleptomancer is describing Caverna, and I kept thinking about that with Frecht as well. Yeah. What were you just talking about, Hannah? I was gonna like respond to something and I can't remember.
Ryan and Shell.
Ryan and Shell. Maybe that was it. It was like the Jelt like creepy, the rearranging face thing. Jelt like had most of the creepy moments in this book. One of the ones that really freaked me out, well, like I mean just the general concept, is like very creepy, but also like that moment when they're in like the healing tent and Hark realizes he's like, I don't think I've seen Jelt's face in like 2 months. And I was like, oh shit. Like, because as soon as he said that, I was like, he's like a water monster now, isn't he? So like that like building like unease, I think was really well done in this one.
Yeah, and when Hark says like he'd been so worried about whether the stone was changing him, he hadn't even considered whether like the fact that Jelt had been in contact with it consistently for so long.
Yeah, and this is like a very like we were saying with like identity, the scariness of this book is about like being changed against your will, and that like I think that is obviously a very scary thing, which I think like even though it happens in Verdigris Deep, I don't feel like it's as much of like a theme. It's like a creepy thing that happens, but it's not like connected to like the motifs of the book. I wonder too if I'm like weighting the Verdigris Deep creepiness higher because I read it so long ago and it still stuck with me. Like I remember we were talking about like the scene where Ryan looks into the mirror and his eyes are closed, freaked me out. Like I think about that all the time. And so it's like maybe I'm just thinking of that one as like being creepier because I've had longer to remember it, so.
Okay. And so, the last thing I had to discuss was the like random extra story at the end.
Oh, I didn't get that one.
You didn't have that?
Is it that Dolor one?
No. Is yours different? So mine's about the glass cardinal. After the acknowledgements, there's an extra, it's like 3 pages of read on for an exclusive tale of the god known as the glass cardinal.
I didn't get that.
I'll
No.
have to send you a photo of it.
Okay. Rude. Yeah, I have no thoughts on that because I didn't read it.
Eowyn, did your copy have that? That's really strange.
Yeah. Apparently it was good. That is really odd. Like, I wonder, because I bought this right when it came out. Whoops, there it is. I bought it right when it came out, so maybe they added it to like a second printing of the paperback.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I feel cheated.
Yeah, it was just really strange because it's after the acknowledgements, and it's totally unrelated to everything else. It's just a story about one of the gods. So yeah, I guess we will not be discussing that.
You can feel free to discuss it. I don't think
Eowyn, well, Eowyn saying you thought it was beautiful. I don't know that I had many stories about it, many thoughts about it particularly, but yeah, she does mention in the acknowledgements that the book started off much longer and had to be cut, so I wonder if it was one of the stories that...
This is already a long book. Eowyn said earlier, you're saying the font is tiny. This is realistically a 550-page book. Yeah, it felt long.
Apparently she has stories for all of the gods that she may publish at some point. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Okay.
I feel like I would be interested in like a short story collection about the gods. I could.
Yeah. Which is like, I think it's funny that I am so interested by them because like that's kind of the point of the book is like everybody's telling Hark like you can't don't be interested in them. It was a bad time. And he's like, yeah, but still.
Yeah, well, I think this story is really interesting because arguably some of the nuance about religion comes back in more in the story. I don't want to spoil it for you now.
Okay.
But because the story's a lot about I don't know if it's nuanced. It still argues for the gods not being able to do anything, but like how believing in the gods is important for people, which I think is interesting.
I thought it was like funny, but it was also really interesting when Cly and Hark are talking, and Cly's like, "What's the point of a god you can pickle?" And Hark is like, "What's the point of a god that can't do anything?" Like, and then that's where Cly has that great moment where he's like, "I'm from a completely different country than the one you're talking about. Like, the continent is not all the same."
Yeah, and saying the book emphasized telling stories, and I wondered if the Lighthouse Keeper was telling that story to Hark. Yeah, I thought the same thing. Yeah, it was just, it felt very random. But yeah, okay. I think that's everything I had. Did you have any other questions or anything you wanted to discuss, or Eowyn, before we go into quotes?
Can't think of anything.
Okay. Should we go into quotes then? Do you want to start?
Sure. Okay. This is the fun part where I get to try and remember why I took a picture of a page. Okay. Oh, well, I mean, I'm sure we all saved this one, but it's like the description of the word fracked when you hear that for the first time. There's another kind of beauty, however, and everyone on the myriad knew it, a twisted beauty that turned your stomach even while it turned your head. Frecht was the old word, a harsh word, ragged with superstitious awe. It was an ugliness and otherness that could only be holy, a breach of the rules that echoed those that no rules could bind. The ancient sacred buildings aspired to that sublime distortion. Frecht transcended beauty and carried you into a realm of awe and terror. It demanded your slavish devotion. Nobody used the word anymore, for it dripped with the memory of the gods. However, sometimes people said beautiful and meant Frecht.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and kind of like the failings of language sometimes as well.
Yeah, and I feel like that's what you were talking about earlier, Hannah, where like there is still this concept of something transcendent,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is really interesting. Like even though like the story, like these gods specifically are not what people think, you know, they're not divine, they're like magical somehow. There is still this like need to describe something that is not of this world, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah. Anyone saying, who was your favorite god? That is, let's do that before we continue with quotes. Did you have a favorite god?
I think it was probably the Hidden Lady,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know how much of that is influenced by Hark or the fact that we just heard more about
I was
her.
thinking the same, yeah.
I
feel like she's the one who we get the most sense of, partly from Quest as well. She's the one that he interacted with.
And she was the most, it's funny to say humanized when she used to be a human, but she's not anymore. But like she was the one that that we're told had the most like essence remaining, like that she still had a mind and everything, which I thought like that was really sad as well, when it's like she was so lonely, you know? And then once again, Quest is like, stop feeling sorry for her, Hark. I can see you doing it. And he's like, yeah. Which is like, I kind of was too, like, because, you know, they got us to care about them.
Yeah. And I mean, when you think about the fact that she started off human, it's even sadder.
Yeah.
Like, the Glass Cardinal Catholic. You see, I just don't know that I got a sense for who any of them are. Like, I know Dolor was the one with the coloured boards. Like, that was like a fun detail.
I didn't even remember
but
that
like,
one. The only thing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Hannah.
No, yeah, I was just thinking like, I don't know. I don't feel like I have many feelings towards any of those three just because we get so little about them.
I also, this is like a silly thing to be annoyed by, but like, I was like the glass cardinal. I'm picturing like a bird, and it's like a jellyfish. I don't understand why is it called the cardinal. The only reason I recognize the name Dolor is because I know that she has like a short story about that one, which I haven't read. But like I didn't remember any specifics about what Dolor looks like or anything. Yeah, I agree. I don't really have like specific feelings about most of them. And then Eowyn shared.
Changes human fear has terrible power. It changes everything, distorts everything, maddens everything. Fear is the dark womb where monsters are born and thrive. Yeah. Okay. I had the merchant was leaning forward now, spyglass jammed to his eye. Since all of this was a story to tell his friends later, a tragedy was as good as a triumph. Better, perhaps. Stories were ruthless creatures and sometimes fattened themselves on bloody happenings.
Yeah. I really liked loyalty is not a virtue in its own right. Its worth depends on where it is spent. I think that's true, and I think more people need to remember that. Which it's like, it's not. I think there is still this concept as like loyalty being something good in the abstract, and it's like it really does depend on like who it's to, and like that's very appropriate for Hark. You know, it's like he is loyal to Jelt for a long time, and Jelt is not worth it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had, I mentioned this one already, but Hark is saying, I've lived my whole life on Lady's Crave, and I know it like my own bones, but at the same time, I feel like I don't know it at all. It's as if I've turned up to a story halfway through. Somebody's telling an old tale by the fire in the tavern, and I got there late. I'm picking it up as well as I can, but I don't really know who all the characters are or why the jokes are funny. When things happen in the story, I can't understand what they mean because I don't know how the story started. Which I think is kind of an accurate representation of history and like the world.
Yeah, like context is everything. Yeah. And again, very like connected to the theme of storytelling, which is a big thing for Hark and for the book. This one is about Chelt. So Hark is explaining, he looked at Selfin, willing her to understand. My friend Jelt was amazing, he signed, but he's gone. He's been dead for years. All that's left of him is in my memories. And there's this other Jelt. Hark shook his head. He's all I've got. He's still my best friend, the only friend that matters. And I hate him. I hate him. I needed to save him. I needed him to be safe and alive and well so I could walk away and never see him again. It was the impossibility of this that had descended upon Hark as he stood in the office with the grey book in his hands. He had realized suddenly that Jelt would never be safe and well enough for him to walk away. However hard he tried, he could never ever save Jelt because Jelt would never allow it.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the moment where he takes the heart into Dr. Vine's, like into the village. I was like, what are you doing? Like, he couldn't leave it with Quest. I get like there were no good choices in that situation, but like this thing that like pulses and everyone around you can feel it. What are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Eowyn saying, "You must not love them," said Quest gently. "It is easy to love power, because power tells you it is majesty and beauty and greatness, but the gods were monsters, do not even love." Yeah. I don't know.
I'm always impressed in books where like the book can make me feel the way the main character is about stuff like that, you know? Where, like I've been talking about how it's like every time Quest would be like, "Stop it. Stop feeling bad for the hidden lady." I was like, but I am though. This is a funny one. The waves don't look that big, thought Hark as they descended. The moment he became aware of the thought, he looked around himself apprehensively. He understood his own luck too well.
Yeah, the one I had like that was Dr. Vine's scruples had room for improvement, but she did have a nice line in good solid doors. Right now, they seemed like highly redeeming quality.
Yeah. That's what we talked about. Like, so Hark is talking about how he's going to be bait for the Jelt monster. "You sure he'll follow you?" asked Selfin. "If he still thinks like Jelt, he'll want to eat me," explained Hark. "It's been that kind of friendship for a while. You are not allowed to choose your friends anymore," sighed Selfin, and Hark couldn't quite suppress a smile. Oh. Okay. Oh, I liked this one. This is when Hark and Jelt are fighting. "No," Hark called back, even as grit stung his eyes. "I don't. There are things you can't owe anybody." Jelt had saved Hark's life, but that didn't mean Hark owed Jelt his life. Maybe you couldn't ever owe somebody your life. Not really. You couldn't let anyone else decide what you did with it. You had to live it yourself as truly as you could.
Yeah, I had that one too. I think my last one was, "We do not want our memories to disappear, so while we still have them, we drop them into the ears of the young, willing or unwilling. Perhaps we hope that will stop our lives fading without trace." Which is Quest to Hark.
Yeah, memory is a big thing as well.
Yeah. Okay. I think that is everything I had. If no one else has anything, we can wrap up. Do you want to introduce the last book?
Sure, it's finally out. Which I know is like not her fault, obviously, but yeah, I should have brought it with me, but I don't have it. But our next and sadly final book is going to be Unraveler. And I know that the US publication date has been pushed back to January, I think, again. So like I was already planning to acquire the UK copy. And I also want to mention that if you are planning to buy a copy and now you're like, oh, well, I can't read it. I got mine from Blackwell's. I will go back and link that in the description as well. And they have free shipping to the US and I think to other countries as well. I don't know. I don't know if that's true for all the other countries they ship to, but it's like a good alternative if you want to get UK editions. Hannah actually introduced me to them.
Yay for Blackwell's. Blackwell's is amazing. Everyone should buy from Blackwell's.
And it's an independent bookstore, and you can use it instead of Book Depository because Book Depository is now owned by Amazon. I know that not everybody has the luxury of not shopping from Amazon, but if you do, and if you're interested in it, Blackwell's is great. Yeah, so Unraveler is going to be our last one. As Hannah mentioned at the beginning, we are going to have like a reflective session, which considering how many books we've read, that might be its own like live show in itself, because I'm sure we'll all have a lot of thoughts. But yeah, bring your opinions, any questions. Like Hannah said, feel free to contact us with any topics you want to discuss or anything you specifically want to see us talk about for that section. Trying to think if there's anything else. Can you think of anything else?
Yeah, hopefully we haven't decided when that one's going to be, but hopefully we will announce it with more notice than this one.
Yeah, apologies again. Scheduling things and just, well, I think I was talking about this once we went live. I had put it in my calendar as if we had already decided on the live show time, and I did not realize until like last night that we hadn't. So I apologize for the very late notice. We are not going to do that again to you guys. Yeah, I think, is there anything else we talked about? Unraveler, the reflective live show. Yeah, keep an eye on mine and Hannah's social media for when we do decide that date, but it's probably going to be, I mean, technically our schedule is usually like midway through like the month, so we might go back to that since we'll have like almost exactly a month. Yeah, Hannah, you want to close it out?
I think that's everything. Yeah. So thank you, Eowyn, as always, and thank you to anyone else who watches this back. Yeah.
See you guys next month.
Yeah, last one.
I know. Try not to think about it.